No, I don't have the Ningguang skin. I was taking a break when it came out, and yes, I'm mad about it. Hello, and welcome to a video where I am praying that Ningguang will be on the upcoming Linnea banner, because for some reason they hate announcing banners any more than 2 days before they go up.
Yeah, so this is awkward.
With the advent of lunar-crystallize, it seems that Ningguang has gained back a lot of the popularity that she lost. Maybe not a lot of it. Maybe just a little bit. It might be more appropriate to say lunar-crystallize has reminded us of Ningguang's existence. And you know what? I'll take it. I'm happy with that. I like Ningguang. She was pretty much my first main. When I didn't understand anything about reactions, Ningguang just let me throw rocks at dudes. So it was fun going back and revisiting her to fully build her and learn the finer details of her kit. And I've really grown to have an appreciation for her. Now, frequenters of this channel are well aware that me liking a unit and a unit being good are two very different things. Not to say that Ningguang is unusable, but she is particularly tricky to play, and even if you do manage to learn how she plays and rotate well and consistently, the reward you get for it is pretty low. I am hoping that Ningguang is a part of any potential leeway buffs we might receive, and I hope that it makes this video outdated, because I really like a lot of the core aspects of her kit, but she definitely has a lot of jank that kinda needs to be reworked at this point, because I think for the player base at large, she's just not very worth it to play. She is an on-field damage dealer who has a lot of jank within her kit, and the damage that she deals isn't enough to justify that jank in my opinion. But you clicked on the Ningguang video, you care about Ningguang, so let's stop worrying about how good she is or isn't. You want to play Ningguang regardless. Let's find out how to play Ningguang. Ningguang's normal attacks are unique in that she only has one normal attack. If you're looking at the screen, you may be wondering, wait, she's doing a few different animations. She has this kind of snap, she has this backhand, and she has this twirl. That actually wasn't pre-recorded. I just got lucky and got all those back to back. Wait, Mies, what did you say? You just got lucky and got all 3 animations back to back? Yeah, I did get lucky because the animation she uses is completely random. I shouldn't say completely random. There might be a small way to influence what animation she uses, but I don't know what it is, and neither does anybody else. At least as far as I could find. All 3 animations all use the same normal attack scaling, and even though it does look like a pretty pitiful 44% of her attack, she fires 2 rocks with each normal attack animation, and each one of these is dealing 44%. Increasing the normal attack to 88% scaling, it's still not good, but it's less bad than 44. Moving on to her next multiplier of her charged attack. This has a much better multiplier of just under 300%, and it doesn't even take that much longer to do than her normals. Although it does have a pretty hefty stamina cost attached to it.
And her charge attack also has 2 animations that it chooses between at random. Yippee, completely random DPS from Ningguang.
So let's talk about the third and final important number within her normal attack scaling, the Star Jade. While the Star Jades don't make up a massive portion of Ningguang's damage, they do make up a pretty important portion of her gameplay. When she hits an enemy with her normal attack, she will gain a Star Jade as indicated by these little rocks floating in a circle behind her. Under normal conditions, she can gain up to 3 of these Star Jades, and they do 2 things for her. The first effect is that when she uses her charge attack, the Star Jades will all fire and home in on the enemy that she was charge attacking at. The second, and probably more important function, can be seen in her A1 passive. Having at least 1 Star Jade completely negates the stamina cost of her charged attack. So between her normal attacks and this one passive, we see a pretty simple game plan. Instead of her normals existing to deal the majority of her damage, they exist to give buffs to her charged attack to make it deal more damage and cost no stamina, so she can spam that. While the maximum amount of Star Jades she can have is 3, it's very rare that you actually want to be gaining all 3 Star Jades before doing your charged attack, because her charged attack is just so much more powerful than her normals, even if we include the damage of the Star Jades. So after you get her first Star Jade and remove the cost of her charged attack, the other 2 Star Jades aren't very important at all. However, there is still one final caveat. It's that these Star Jades are projectiles, and they take a little bit of time to get to their target. So while her optimal sheeting combo is doing one normal attack into a charge attack just to get the Jade and get your free charge attack, and doing that over and over and over. That doesn't always play out, because occasionally your normal attack can take too long to reach the enemy and you won't get your Star Jade before using your charged attack. It can even happen close up if you're particularly fast. So to stay on the safe side and get enough Jades to make sure that I'm canceling the cost of my charge attack, my general recommended combo is 2 normal attacks into a charged attack. Additionally, her Star Jade mechanic is really weird, and because she fires 2 separate projectiles for her normal attack, occasionally some weird hitbox stuff can happen and you can get 2 Star Jades from 1 normal attack. So by doing N2C combos, you can actually occasionally get a fully empowered 3 Jade charged attack. Now, I've been talking about what is optimal to do, but I haven't talked about how exactly to do it, because Ningguang does have a little bit of tech. What is that little bit of tech? Hold W the entire time you're playing her. If I just spam normal attacks on her, you can see each attack has a pretty long end lag and it takes a while to get between them. But a feature of her only having 1 normal attack multiplier is that she doesn't have any sort of normal attack combo that she gets locked into. So if I use Shilonen and I hold W and I spam my normals, she'll just go through her normal attack combination as expected, with only the end lag of the last normal attack being cancelled. But for Ningguang, since she only has 1 normal attack in her combo, holding W will make her start moving as soon as she can once her normal attack animation is done. So just by holding W and spamming normal attacks, she immediately cancels out of her animation and begins to walk once she's done doing a normal attack. And once she starts walking, you can immediately click again and have her initiate another normal attack. These are walk cancels, but people are so adverse to the term walk cancels that I just didn't bother using the phrase. But as a person who plays some technically demanding characters, these are some of the easiest cancels in the game, and they'll gain you a pretty significant amount of DPS. So just hold W.
Okay, one final thing to add to this section. Holding W can mess with how your charged attacks are input, so occasionally if you're trying to do your 2 normals into a charge attack while holding W the entire time, you'll do your normals, but your charge attack just won't happen and you'll start walking forward. This doesn't always happen, but it does happen enough to be annoying. So if you want to avoid that, what you can do to counteract it, simply lift the W key when you're doing your charge attack. Hold it for the normal attacks. When you go into the charge attack, you lift it. Hold W for normals, lift it for charged. Hold W for normals, lift it for charged. It's a little bit more difficult, but it makes the combo a lot more consistent.
Okay, are we finally done with her normal attacks? Let's look at her skill. Ningguang's Jade screen is potentially the messiest part of her kit. It's an interesting little ability. It's a lot of fun, has a pretty decent multiplier attached to it, so obviously you pretty much want to be using it off of cooldown. And of course it has the additional property of acting like a shield. If you'd believe it, it will block incoming projectiles, although it's based on Ningguang's health and the scaling is a little bit lower than her base health. And Ningguang isn't a particularly tanky character, so by extension, neither is her shield. And the secondary effect that you saw when I walked through it is of course an effect of her A4 passive. Walking through the Jade screen gives you 12% geo damage bonus for 10 seconds. 12% geo damage bonus is not a lot of damage bonus, but it is a universal increase to all her sources of damage, so your general game plan will be to place it down and run through it before doing any more damage. 12% isn't so much that you should be desperately concerned about getting this buff up, but if you're able to, you can throw down her shield, run through it, and get the damage bonus. And if you haven't played Ningguang before, you might be asking, well, what situation would I not be able to run through her shield? It's on a fairly short cooldown, same as her burst, so she should be able to just do it once a rotation, right? And yes, she is able to cast her skill once a rotation, but it doesn't mean the Jade screen's gonna stick there. Of course, the first thing is that it is a shield, it has health. If that health gets reduced to 0, the shield will break, although that's not generally a big concern. The much larger concern is that this is a geo construct. An older geo construct. It doesn't get the privilege that Ito and Kachina get, where if you use the ability too close to a boss, the boss will just push the construct away. If you cast Ningguang's shield too close to a boss, Bye-bye shield. This is probably one of the jankiest parts of Ningguang's kit because she is, no pun intended, stuck between a rock and a hard place, where her skill does damage and you do want to cast it close enough to enemies so that they will take that damage, but also the shield existing has external utilities in this passive and also, as we're going to see, through her burst. So you want it to deal damage, but you also don't want it to break. Thankfully, the hitbox for the damage is pretty large. It's a bit larger than the screen itself, but every big boss has different hitboxes that interact with geoconstructs and interact with damage. So almost every big boss that you fight with Ningguang is going to be a trial and error of trying to find where exactly you can place her shield so that it deals damage without breaking. There are plenty of clips from my streams of me doing this exact thing. I think that's mostly it for the skill, and now we can move on to the burst. Although, as I noted, the burst is indeed connected to the skill. At a baseline, Ningguang's burst is pretty simple. She simply summons a bunch of rocks and they will all home in towards her enemy. And the star jades you see behind me are an effect of her C6. Normally, her burst doesn't give her any star jades. However, when her jade screen exists... Oh, come on. Are you kidding me? I don't even know how I managed to do that. I managed to not deal any damage to the boss, but still get my screen destroyed. If her screen exists while she's casting her burst, it will transform, becoming not a shield anymore, and generate 6 more projectiles identical to the ones that Ningguang herself generates. And while this does theoretically double the damage of her burst, the rocks generated by the Jade screen do have a habit of throwing themselves into the ground. So while having her skill up doesn't always double the damage that her burst deals, even if upwards of 3 of its rocks hit the ground, it still provides a pretty meaningful increase onto her burst. So you should have her Jade screen out before using it. And for her base kit, that's pretty much it, although she does have some pretty meaningful increases within her constellations. C1 isn't particularly meaningful, it gives her normals better AoE. That AoE isn't really a meaningful increase unless you have a character like Venti on the team where you can consistently get enemies grouped up for a long period of time very close to each other. In that case, the C1 helps Ningguang deal more consistent normal attack damage to all the enemies within Venti's burst, but even so, it's only her normal attack, it's not the charged attack. So a pretty niche buff to a fairly small portion of her damage. Moving on from C1, which is almost entirely useless, to C2, which a lot of people agree, me included, that this is her best constellation. When the Jade screen is shattered, its cooldown will reset. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds, which, may I note, is half the duration of the skill's innate cooldown. This constellation does a few different things for Ningguang. It is both quality of life and a significant improvement on her damage wrapped into one constellation. The quality of life is there in the fact that if you get too close to the enemy and break your shield when you cast it, its cooldown is reset and you get a second chance to get your shield up for running through it, for using your burst, for whatever you might need it for. Alternatively, the damage is there because you can purposefully break your shield on enemies, get the cooldown reset, and then use the second cast to, well, if you're better at Ningguang than I am, deal some damage and respawn the shield. And you don't actually have to purposefully break your shield to make use of this constellation, because using her burst and transforming the shield also counts as destroying it for the purposes of this constellation. So you can place the shield nice and normally, have it deal its damage, cast your burst, and then place it again. The one thing that this constellation does not help with is energy generation. Ningguang, weirdly enough, is a unit that has a cooldown on how often her skill can generate particles, that cooldown being 6 seconds. So if I use my skill the first time, but it breaks, I get the cooldown reset, but I'll still generate my particles. But using a second time, I just deal damage, I don't get any energy from it. This is very rarely a factor to Ningguang herself because of how low her burst cost is, and because she's an on-fielder, she's going to be catching most of the particles in a team. But if you're using Ningguang as a sort of support quick swapper, this can affect her ability to battery other characters. Her burst isn't completely free. There are some situations in which this property can affect how often you can get your burst. In general, I'd say it doesn't really affect my gameplay, but it's good to know that her skill can only generate particles once every 6 seconds. So in general, this C2, it makes her feel better to play, it lets her front load a little bit more of her damage. Also, because it only has a 6-second cooldown, you can play around with that and potentially get 3 skills out in a rotation. Cast your first skill, don't let it break, but then use your burst, so you get the reset, wait 6 seconds, cast a second skill that maybe intentionally breaks on a boss, get another reset, and then cast a third. Her skill is a meaningful multiplier within her kit. It is the highest single multiplier that she has access to, but whether an extra 440% scaling is worth keeping track of her cooldowns and weird play patterns, that's up to you. C3 and C5 are talent level constellations. Their talent level constellations. Before C6, her burst actually does make up her largest source of motion value in her kit, so C3 is nice for that, but she has pretty split talent priorities because she gets damage from every single talent. C4. C6 immediately gives her 7 Star Jades when her burst is used, and this is meaningful for a few different reasons. Number one, it just lets her get a decent amount more damage out faster because it gives her her charge attack and 7 Star Jades immediately. But secondarily, it actually changes her talent priority. If you are on-fielding Ningguang and if you're doing your combos correctly, the damage you get from her normal attacks and her burst are extremely similar, so much that pre-C6, most of your damage is going to come from your burst, but post C6, once you get that 1 extra charge attack with its 7 Star Jades, the priority switches over from her burst into her normal attacks. Still, the numbers are very close, and you should probably just level them equally like I have here. But if you are planning on crowning 1 talent and 1 talent only for on-field Ningguang, it should be her normals. Now, this constellation is certainly pretty nice to have, but I definitely think people overvalue it a little bit. It does get Ningguang more damage than her C2 does, but it doesn't bring nearly the same amount of quality of life. It does help you front load damage, and that can be pretty nice. It helps you burst down lower health opponents, it makes her a bit better of a quick swap carry, but I still believe that the C2 is generally the more important constellation. C6 is definitely her second best constellation, and if she receives any sort of buffs in the future, I assume that even more power will be siphoned into it, but it's not necessary. It just gives her a little bit of extra damage and a little bit of extra utility. Alright, are we ready to get into teams? Oh wait, no, I forgot about gear. Both of the standard 5-star options are pretty powerful. I generally choose between them for my weapons on Ningguang, based on artifacts, based on team comps. Lost Prayer is definitely nice for the crit rate it gives, but I actually end up using this one less than Skyward Atlas, because number one of her better artifact sets, if you run her with Farina, is Marushosei. Between the crit rate from Marushosei and Lost Prayer, it becomes pretty easy to overcap on her. Additionally, the passive of Lost Prayer requires you to stay on field for a decent amount of time to slowly build up a damage bonus buff, and she has a fair amount of front-loaded damage in her kit. She immediately swaps in, uses her skill, uses her burst. If she has C6, she uses a charge attack, and all of that damage won't get to benefit from the higher levels of Lost Prayer's passive. I actually generally prefer Skyward Atlas. It has a decently higher base attack, which makes up for Ningguang's fairly low base attack. Her base attack is a mere 212, that makes it so attack percent buffs on her are less impactful than they are on units with higher base attacks. Granted, our number 1 attack buffer in the game buffs attack flatly. He doesn't base it on a percentage. He just gives a flat amount based on his own base attack. The same applies to Kujo-Sora and Ion-san. But if you're not running one of those external attack buffers, it can be more impactful to put your Ningguang on a higher base attack weapon. Additionally, its passive is static and doesn't take time to build up, so all of Ningguang's front-loaded damage gets to take advantage of its small elemental damage bonus. I have this at Refinement 2, but at Refinement 1, it's 12%, same as from her passive, so same thing applies there. It's a nice damage bonus to have, but not insanely meaningful. Additionally, I actually find this secondary effect to be kind of nice on this. When dealing damage with normal attacks, you have a chance to gain this little wind orb next to you that will automatically seek out enemies and deal physical damage, and it hangs out while you're off field, so that's like a fun, cool thing, I guess. Unfortunately, Ningguang is just a bit of an undertuned character. She is very old at this point, and her age shows, so adding on an extra multiplier onto her kit can actually be kinda nice. Not incredibly impactful. I probably shouldn't be talking about it as much as I am, but it's a cool thing that I like to use. As for other weapon options, none of the 5 stars are particularly good for her, and most just act as stat sticks. I know a lot of people like Memory of Dust on her because it looks good. Do we all know that Memory of Dust isn't a good weapon by this point? I feel like we all know by this point. If you want to keep using it on her because it looks good, fine. It's a decent stat stick. It gives you a bunch of attack, but it's definitely not anywhere near good enough to justify its existence as a limited weapon. Maybe if it was standard, I'd recommend it, but it's not. Aside from Memory of Dust, there is one actual good option I want to talk about. That being Wriothesley's signature, Cashflow Supervision. It does require that your HP fluctuates to get its full passive up, but if you have Farina in the team, you can easily activate this, and then it gives a bunch of stats that are useful for Ningguang. Normal attack damage bonus, charge attack damage bonus, attack percent, even a little bit of attack speed. That's nice to have, even though it's not incredibly impactful. Definitely a good stat stick, and if you throw Farina in the team to activate its passive, it becomes Ningguang's best. Now, some 4-star options. Widsith is Widsith. Just use Widsith. I legitimately don't think that there is a single other 4-star weapon that you should really be considering. Sack Jade gives a bunch of crit rate, but the passive is pretty worthless. I guess Pamber can be functional for a more supportive quick swappy build, but you're giving up a lot of damage by running Pamber, and she already doesn't do very much damage, so you kind of have to take what you can get. Eye of Perception is a 3-star version of Skyward Atlas. No, I didn't misspeak. This is a 3-star weapon. And then we have Solar Pearl, which is her second best 4-star option, but it's still not really good. She is one of the few units that is actually able to keep full uptime on the passive. She consistently goes back and forth between using normal attacks and skills, but where this weapon kind of falls off is that it doesn't buff charged attack damage. Her normals make up a pretty small amount of her damage profile, and most of the damage coming from her normal attack talent are coming from charged attacks and Star Jades, which are also tagged as charged attack damage. So she can technically use Solar Pearl and get very good uptime on its passive, but the fact that it doesn't buff her charged attack damage makes it fall a bit behind weapons like Widsith. Granted, Widsith has pretty long downtime, and of course the effects are random, so if you really don't want to be dealing with those things, you can run Solar Pearl. Or maybe Solar Pearl makes your build work a little bit better because it has a crit rate substat instead of a crit damage one. Solar Pearl does get closer to Widsith at higher refines, but considering Widsith is a weapon you can get on any banner at any time, and Solar Pearl is a Battle Pass exclusive weapon, I pretty much think there's no reason to consider using Solar Pearl unless you already have one at R5. Now, artifacts. Main stats are attack, damage, crit. She does have certain teams where she gets a bunch of damage bonus and no attack, and in those teams, attack goblets can be competitive, but you can default to attack, damage, crit. I've been running her on 2-piece recently, not because she doesn't have a best set, but I don't have her best set. Nighttime Whispers in the Echoing Woods was a set that was specifically made for Navia. It gives you attack, and after using a skill, you get some geo damage bonus. That damage bonus is 20%, but if you are protected by a crystallized shield, or if you recently triggered lunar-crystallize, that 20% is increased to 50%. So yes, this set does have the caveat that if you're not running lunar-crystallize, you do have to collect a crystallized shard. That's not really an issue with Navia, as she automatically collects crystal shards with her hold skill. It's just a bit of a headache thing with Ningguang. It's not a big caveat, as long as you can trigger crystallizes, which you should in most teams that she's played in. You generally don't really do 4 geo units, or I don't know, 3 geo units and an animo unit or a dendro unit. If you don't care to farm Nighttime Whispers, or if you're like me and you're still working on getting a good set, 2-piece options work perfectly fine, but also she of course has a few sets that can be enabled by other units. Mara Chaussee was one I mentioned before. Farina is already a pretty decent support for her. She can be used to activate Mara Chaussee, which is a pretty nice damage increase for Ningguang. She also has pretty nice healing options for Farina teams in Shilonin and soon-to-be Linnea, who both heal for Farina and do some extra Geo Res Shred, and then Shilonin buffs further with Scroll, and Linnea does her own personal damage. Mara Chaussee is a nice option if you can enable it, and also, speaking of Linnea, Night Sky. A lot of interest for Ningguang has come back due to the existence of lunar-crystallize and her ability to make pretty decent use of it. And if you're already putting units into your team that enable lunar-crystallize, it's pretty likely that you're also going to enable this set. It's a little bit worse for Ningguang's damage than Mara Chaussee. It gives 6% less crit rate, and the 2-piece isn't really useful for her at all. It's just EM. We'll talk about how lunar-crystallize works in a second, just to clear up any misconceptions. But it is still a pretty good set as long as you can enable it. Is that it? I think that's it. Let's talk about teams. Starting off with a very basic lunar-crystallize team, I believe I've heard a lot of people who use this exact team. Everyone knows what Farina does. Shilonin is here to shred res, use scroll and heal for Farina, and Columbina is not a particularly powerful unit here. She doesn't have a second Nod Cry unit to be buffing. It also means she can't use her better set options. So in this team, I actually like to run Columbina on Tenacity. By running Linnea instead of Shilonin, you will be able to activate Columbina's better artifact sets. You're just going to make her and Linnea deal a lot more damage. You can also use that to enable the use of Night Sky on Ningguang. It's going to reduce her damage a little bit compared to Mara Shosei, but because it gives a full party buff, giving that 10% lunar reaction damage, it's actually possible that swapping to this set and reducing Ningguang's damage to increase the damage of your lunar units a little bit will result in higher team DPS. But if you want to focus on Ningguang's damage, Mara Shosei is the move. And I actually have been mostly talking about Linnea, but I'd like to talk about a character that I don't think I will ever get the chance to talk about otherwise, and I wish I had him to show you, but Itlua. The reason I haven't talked about him very much is I find his kit design very frustrating. His entire kit is based on buffing Geo talent damage. When normal attacks, charge attacks, plunging attacks, elemental skills, and elemental bursts of nearby active party members deal Geo damage to opponents, one stack of Nightingale Song is consumed to increase that damage. And he buffs in quills just like Shenhe does. And then he has another little caveat added on. If that damage is lunar-crystallize damage, the buff that he gives will be increased. So that's pretty cool, right? General Geo buffer, but he can also buff lunar-crystallize talent damage. And yeah, that's basically what all of these words are. This is just saying, yeah, no, he can't buff reaction damage. So if you're doing lunar crystallize reaction damage and not lunar crystallize talent damage, he won't buff that. In any case, cool enough design until you look at the numbers. The lunar crystallize bonus is a pretty hefty 225% EM, but the regular geo damage bonus is 33%. 33% of Itlua's EM is tiny. His lunar crystallized damage buff is almost 7 times his base geo damage buff, and his base geo damage buff is almost meaningless. Of course, you can increase this scaling with talent levels, but getting his burst to level 13, so crowning him and getting his C3, still only brings that base geo damage buff to 70% of his EM. It's just kind of pitiful. And then he also has a little bit of a geo crit damage bonus, which this is pretty good. I can't complain about this much at all. This is a generic crit buff to all geo damage dealt. 5% crit rate, 10% crit damage. At C6, it increases to 10 and 30% respectively. Those crit buffs are pretty real and can actually substantially increase some geo damage, but the fact that a large portion of his kit barely buffs regular geo damage just makes him not worth using for most units. However, Ningguang is not most units. Given that this is a quill buff that adds a flat amount of damage onto any instance of damage it buffs, it benefits instances of low damage much more than instances of high damage. And would you believe it, Ningguang is a unit that hits very frequently who has pretty low multipliers on all of her individual hits. He's still not great, and Linnea is still absolutely better, but Ningguang is uniquely set up to take advantage of Itlua's buffs. Between his flat damage buff, his crit buff, and him being a moon sign unit that enables any other synergies on the team, like with Columbina, he increases her AoE, he enables Ningguang to be put on Night Sky. He can be a very interesting option, and one of the only options that increases Ningguang's personal damage in Lunar Crystallize teams. Now let's talk a little bit about Lunar Crystallize itself and why it matters to Ningguang. Now I'm realizing with the way I said it, I kind of set myself up to be doing a big talk, but it's really not that complicated. Ningguang used to not have any reactions that dealt any damage, and now she has one. And she gets a little bit of extra damage because of it. I should be fair, because Ningguang actually does benefit a little bit more from Lunar Crystallize than other units do. The first thing is that Ningguang alternates between her talents to get a lot of damage out. Her main gameplay loop uses a mix of skills, bursts, normals, and charged attacks. And also, most of her abilities hit pretty frequently. Between her swapping between all of her abilities to do her damage and her doing multiple hits of damage with most of her abilities, she ends up applying a fair amount more geo than your standard carries. That means she can trigger a fair amount more reactions, which before Lunar Crystallize existed, this didn't really have a use, but now that she can actually convert these applications into a reaction that deals damage, she benefits a little bit more than units who apply less geo. So let's just do a normal rotation and track our reaction tracker.
Hear the echoes of the valley. Don't waste my time.
Okay, let's stop it there. 13 triggers of Lunar Crystallize, comparing to another unit like Ito. 10 Lunar Crystallizes across one rotation. Now I kind of want to check Navia. Navia has the same property that Ningguang does, where she deals her damage with a lot of different talents. She has her burst going off field, she then uses her skill to infuse her normal attacks and do a few normal attacks. So it'll be interesting to see if they have similar amounts of Lunar Crystallized triggers at the end. Okay, there we go. Yeah, Navia exactly matched the amount of Lunar Crystallize that Ningguang triggered, but she has much more uptime on her Geo application. Ningguang is also able to do faster rotations than Navia is. She's also much more flexible with her application, whereas Navia, it's pretty prescribed. She has a pretty set order in using her burst, and then you use her skills and do a few normals after that, whereas Ningguang can get a lot more creative. And she also wasn't getting the benefit that Navia was, where Navia could trigger some Lunar Crystallizes off field. Hi, I know. Ow. So when she's on field, she can apply Geo a lot faster than Navia. The second reason Lunar Crystallize benefits Ningguang a bit more than other units is she's just a bit weaker than other units. Everyone gets the same increase from Lunar Crystallize. I'm just going to throw a number at the wall. Do not take this seriously at all. But let's just say that everybody gets 10,000 extra DPS by including Lunar Crystallize in their teams. 10k DPS matters a lot less for Navia, who's pushing 80, 90, even 100k in some of her teams, whereas Ningguang, who hovers a bit more around the 50 to 60k mark, 10k DPS on top of 60k is proportionally a larger increase than 10k DPS on top of 90k. Now, final thing that I want to talk about regarding Lunar Crystallize, I want to talk about how EM is not a particularly good stat for Ningguang, even in Lunar Crystallize. And this goes for every Geo carry that you play in Lunar Crystallize except for Tsibai. Aside from the base damage increase that you get from units that enable Lunar Crystallize scales on two stats. The first one being EM and the second one being crit. However, EM gets actual diminishing returns pretty quickly. Not the weird diminishing returns that people talk about that aren't actually diminishing returns, but each additional point of EM will make each point of EM that you already have worth a little bit less. Meanwhile, the crit scaling does not. Your crit always just applies as regular. This already incentivizes you to build crit over EM as a damaging stat for Lunar Crystallize. So your crit stats not only make your Lunar Crystallize damage scale better, but it's also just crit. Crit scales all of Ningguang's damage, including Lunar Crystallize damage, instead of EM, which just increases her Lunar Crystallize damage by kind of a low rate. And that's why EM is a much more usable stat on the actual lunar units dealing lunar reaction damage through their talents, because not only does EM affect their reaction damage, but it affects their talent damage. However, even if EM was a particularly good stat that you could get a lot of value by building into, as I mentioned, it has diminishing returns, and generally in Nodcry teams, you're already going to be running Serenade, which gives you a big chunk of team-wide EM, or you're going to be running a unit like Inefa or Columbina, who in their bursts buff your lunar reaction damage. Columbina's burst is giving you the exact same stat that EM would be giving you if you were building it. So really, this goes for more than just Ningguang. This goes for all non-lunar carries in lunar teams. If you are playing a non-lunar carry in a lunar team to take advantage of the lunar reactions, don't build EM on that carry. Just build crit, because your crit affects your lunar reaction damage as well as your talent damage, and you're probably going to be plenty saturated on EM anyways because of the passive buffs given by Nodcry sets and Nodcry characters. Alright, I think it's finally time to just play this team and show you guys how it performs. I figured this is a good time to also talk about my general combo and rotation with Ningguang. After I do all my setup, I start off swapping to Ningguang, do a skill, and dash through the shield so I can get my geo damage bonus. Immediately use her burst into her charge attack to use all the Star J's and get all that front-loaded damage. Then I go into my N2Cs. I'll do 1 or 2 of those before placing a second shield so I can dash through it again and refresh the buff. Additionally, in one of my rotations, I bursted at the end as well. It definitely slows down the rotation a little bit, and I don't think it was really worth it in just a raw DPS test, checking against a dummy. But if you're in a situation where you have an enemy with particularly low health, it can be worth it to extend your rotation a little bit to finish them off with Ningguang Burst and an extra charged attack. I don't even know if she was on the right stuff there. I was just assuming that she had the right gear on. And oh boy, she was absolutely not. Okay, let's maybe do this a little bit better. Just by changing the sets and getting her properly equipped, 10k DPS increase. I swear, she's not as terrible as everybody says she is. She's just, I mean, she's not great. But this is easily Abyss level DPS. This can get you through pretty much anything in Imaginarium as long as you meet the shill, which actually is something that I do want to talk about, Imaginarium. It also definitely wasn't perfect play, but perfect play isn't going to get me much higher than 60k. So initially I was going to end the video there, because I really mostly wanted to talk about lunar-crystallize Ningguang, and I think that's what most people care about. But it felt a little bit weird doing such a general guide and mentioning so many things she can do, and then only talking about one specific team. So I went back and I got some more footage with this team. This is a team that focuses a lot more on Ningguang's talent damage, and this one I was actually able to bring into some relevant content. I have some Abyss footage after this, but for now I wanted to show off the DPS dummy, show that Ningguang is indeed the largest contributor in this team. I mean, she's receiving the most buffs, so it's what makes sense. And then I was able to take it into Abyss. This team was much more suited to this Abyss, so I was much more comfortable taking it in. Second chamber has a pyro check, and I think it's pretty cool that Ningguang is able to get a 90-second clear against Hamster without any sort of beneficial Abyss buff. It did take me a few times because Ningguang is Ningguang. She has her jank. I got a few times. The Hamster is a particularly grievous offender when it comes to her Jade Shield. It seems like its hitbox changes all the time. And even if you do manage to get the shield up without it breaking immediately on the Hamster, it has a lot of big hitboxes and a lot of residual damage, so it's often able to just break the shield through damage anyways. But because she's a ranged character, the usual issues that come up using Circle Impact against Hamster aren't as prominent. Additionally, while I'm here, I did want to mention Ningguang was absolutely incredible in my most recent Imaginarium run. This isn't unique to Ningguang. This is a general trait of all the 4-star carries in the game. Because they're a little bit weaker than the 5-star carries, they're fantastic units to use in the early stages of Imaginarium when they can still easily carry a stage, and they make it so you can save your stronger units to the later stages. Even the better 4-star carries like Sethos and Gaming require a lot of setup to be particularly good, so they can also tend to suffer a little bit in Imaginarium, but they are fantastic for padding out the earlier stages. This Imaginarium in particular was pretty rough for me because of the elemental combo. I don't have a Escoffier, I don't have Skirk, I don't have Tsibai, I don't plan on getting Linnea, so to beat Lunar Mode this time around, I had to be very careful and stingy with my units. I actually had to reset Imaginarium entirely. But on my second run, I got an early Ningguang, and she was able to completely carry the first 2 floors on her own. I don't have particularly good carries in these elements. I don't have Zibai, I don't have Skirker Escoffier, I don't have Ganyu even. Getting Ningguang early and letting her hard carry the first 2 stages made it possible for me to save a lot of my more powerful on-fielders and off-fielders instead of throwing away like Xingqiu or Navia in one of the first 2 stages. I know it's kind of funny to be like, haha, Ningguang's use case is that you can use her in the easiest stages of the easiest game mode, but if you don't have a lot of the more powerful characters in any given elemental combo, units like Ningguang that are very useful in the early stages but fall off into the later ones can be really helpful in getting Imaginarium runs off the ground. Additionally, she's a 4-star, you probably have her, and she can contribute towards your unit count for the mode. Imaginarium has been getting meaningfully harder over the past few months, so it's definitely something I want to try incorporating into more conversations about this game. And while she's definitely not a Stygian tier unit, and she can even be a little bit difficult to play into Abyss, Imaginarium is a mode that really gives her a strong use case. And depending on what characters you have access to, Ningguang can make a meaningful difference in your Imaginarium runs, like she did mine. Okay, I think that's it for this video, but Ningguang content is definitely not done. Even though she's not particularly good, she has given me a very unique and challenging play experience, which is a really big breath of fresh air when characters in Genshin are made to be easier and easier to operate. She's weird and janky, but if you're like me and you like that sort of thing, Ningguang definitely has her use cases. Thank you to my YouTube channel members: Najudo, Rumpalta, ZachZDR, Mudkip1727, Beef Potato, Roberto Desu, Big Soup Buffalo Milk, DB Bab, TSI Amat, Mahosho Jaruru, Smoothie, Starnova, Pop Roxy, Tay Tylee, and Aqua. Thank you for your continued support throughout the months. Greatly appreciated as always. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you learned something. Have a lovely day.